We are counting down 30 forgotten cheap Canadian meals families survived on in the 1950s. These are dishes that kept children fed through prairie winters, maritime storms, and the long shadow of the Depression that never quite left the back of every mother's mind. Meals born in farmhouse kitchens, mining camp cookhouses, and Quebec row houses, where a bone could feed a family for 3 days, and nothing, not one scrap, ever went to waste. Which forgotten meal tops our list? Let us count down from number 30. Number 30, fried bologna. In households from Sudbury to St. John, fried bologna was Tuesday night supper without discussion or apology. Mothers peeled thick slices from a whole bologna roll, nicked the edges so they would not curl in the pan, and laid them into a cast iron skillet slicked with a little lard. The edges crisped and browned, the center puffed up in a dome, and the smell, smoky and sweet and faintly spiced, drifted through every room in the house. Served on white bread with yellow mustard and a dill pickle on the side, a whole meal cost less than 30 cents in 1955. Children raced to the kitchen at that smell. Fathers never complained. Bologna was the meat you could count on when the week ran long and the paycheck ran short, and in working-class Canada, that was most of the time. Number 29, oatmeal porridge with molasses. Before any child left for school on a January morning, there was porridge. Not the instant kind, the kind that simmered on the back of the wood stove for 40 minutes, thick enough to hold a spoon upright when it cooled. Mothers stirred it steady, adding a pinch of salt, and served it in heavy ceramic bowls with a spoonful of blackstrap molasses pooling dark in the center. A 5-pound bag of rolled oats cost about 25 cents and fed a family of 6 for a full week of breakfasts. The molasses added iron and sweetness and made children feel they were getting a treat when they were getting a staple. Grandmothers on the prairies called it the only honest breakfast. They were right. Number 28, salt pork and potatoes. This was the meal that built half of rural Canada. A slab of salt pork, soaked overnight to pull some of the brine out, then sliced and fried until the fat rendered golden and the lean parts crisped at the edges. Served alongside boiled potatoes and whatever garden vegetables the root cellar still held in February. In Newfoundland and the Maritimes, salt pork was not a fallback. It was the anchor. A 3-pound slab cost less than 50 cents and lasted a family the better part of a week. Oral histories from Cape Breton recall the sound of the fat spitting in the pan, the way the whole house smelled of rendered pork by 5 o'clock, and the particular satisfaction of mopping the plate clean with a heel of bread. Number 27, creamed corn on toast. When the garden put up more corn than the family could eat fresh, mothers cut the kernels from the cob, scraped the milky pulp with the back of a knife, and cooked it down with butter, a splash of milk, and salt into something thick, sweet, and warming. Ladled over slices of toasted homemade bread on a cold autumn evening, creamed corn on toast cost almost nothing and tasted like summer preserved. In years when the corn crop was good, families ate this 3 times a week through September. Either way, the bowl was always scraped clean. Number 26, canned salmon loaf. Pink canned salmon was a Canadian pantry staple long before supermarkets existed, and in the 1950s it was the affordable protein hundreds of thousands of families relied on every Friday. Mothers emptied the tin into a bowl, mashed in breadcrumbs soaked in milk, stirred in a beaten egg, a spoonful of mustard, and a fistful of herbs from the windowsill. They packed the mixture into a loaf tin, baked it until firm, then sliced it and served it with a white sauce poured over. A tin of salmon cost about 30 cents, and it fed 4 people. Some families ate this meal every single Friday of the year without variation, and the grandchildren still remember the smell of it baking. Number 25, pork hocks and sauerkraut. German and Ukrainian settlers brought this dish to the prairies, and it spread because it was inexpensive, required almost no attention, and filled the house with a smell that meant warmth was coming. Pork hocks, the cheapest cut at any butcher's counter, simmered for hours with homemade sauerkraut, a bay leaf, and a handful of peppercorns. The fat melted into the brine, and the meat fell from the bone. It was served with boiled potatoes and dark bread. A pair of hocks cost about 40 cents. The sauerkraut came from the family's own garden. The meal cost next to nothing and tasted like the full weight of a good harvest. Number 24, bread and lard. Here is where you look away or lean in. In the lean years, the 1950s were lean for more families than the history books acknowledge, and bread and lard was not a snack or a curiosity. It was supper. Thick slices of homemade white bread spread with soft white lard from the tin, salted, sometimes topped with a thin scrape of grated onion. No plate required. Children ate standing at the counter. Mothers ate last. A pound of lard cost 8 cents in 1953. There was no shame in bread and lard. There was only the counting of what was left until Friday. Number 23, tourtière. In Quebec, the meat pie known as tourtière was not a holiday luxury. It was the weekly meal that appeared on the table every Friday night in working-class households from Montreal to the Gaspésie. Ground pork, seasoned with cinnamon, cloves, and savory, packed into a simple lard pastry and baked until the crust turned gold. The spices filled the stairwells of 3-story triplexes. Children smelled it 3 floors up. Mothers made 6 at a time and lined them along the cold back porch to set. A single tourtière fed a family of 5 for under $1 in 1956. It was not fancy. It was necessary. And it was magnificent. Number 22, chicken neck soup. Nothing was wasted, not one bone, not one neck. When a family butchered chickens in the fall, the necks, backs, feet, and giblets went into the pot that same afternoon. Simmered for hours with an onion, a carrot, a stalk of celery, and dried herbs from the rafters, chicken neck soup produced a broth so rich it set to jelly overnight. Mothers picked every scrap of meat from the necks and stirred it back in with noodles or barley. For a prairie homestead family, this meal cost nothing. Every ingredient came from the farm. Every bowl meant nothing had been thrown away. The lesson was the meal. Number 21, macaroni and stewed tomatoes. Before anyone called it pasta, there was macaroni. It was boiled until soft, drained, and mixed with a can of stewed tomatoes, a knob of butter, and salt. Some mothers added a fried onion. Some added a strip of bacon, diced small. Most added nothing extra because nothing extra was needed. Macaroni and stewed tomatoes fed 4 people for less than 20 cents in 1954. It appeared on Canadian tables coast to coast, from Nova Scotia fishing towns to British Columbia mill towns. Children asked for seconds. There was a generation that grew up believing this was simply what supper was. Number 20, pea soup with ham bone. In French Canada, soupe au pois was not optional. It was doctrine. Yellow split peas soaked overnight and simmered for hours with a ham bone and a whole onion studded with cloves. The soup turned thick as paste, golden, and fragrant with salt and smoke. A ham bone cost almost nothing at the butcher. A pound of dried peas was 15 cents. The pot fed a family for 2 days and improved each time it was reheated. In the logging camps of northern Quebec and Ontario, cooks made this in cauldrons that held 30 gallons. Men ate it 3 times a week and never complained. The spoon stood upright in the bowl. That was how you knew it was ready. Number 19, bannock. This is the bread that kept more people alive across more of Canada than any other single food. Indigenous communities had long traditions of flatbreads made from available grains, and by the 1950s, bannock baked in cast iron over a wood stove had become the daily bread of rural and remote households from Yukon to Labrador. Flour, baking powder, lard, salt, water, and a hot pan. Mixed in 4 minutes, done in 15 minutes, still warm when it hit the table, spread with lard or jam, or eaten plain alongside soup or stew. There was no cheaper bread. There was no more honest bread. Number 18, liver dumplings in broth. Ukrainian and Polish immigrants who settled the prairies brought this dish with them and kept making it because it worked. Beef liver, ground fine and mixed with egg, flour, salt, pepper, and grated onion, was formed into small dumplings and dropped into a rich, clear beef broth. The dumplings puffed and turned dense and deeply savory as they cooked. Liver cost almost nothing in 1953. The broth was made from bones the butcher gave away. The whole pot cost under 50 cents and fed 6 people. Grandmothers on the prairies made this every Wednesday without exception. Grandchildren remember it the way they remember snowstorms and harvests, as something that simply was. Number 17. Fiddleheads with bacon fat. Every May in the river valleys of New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Quebec, families went to the woods. Not for recreation, for dinner. Fiddlehead ferns grew in dense clusters along riverbanks, and for 2 weeks in spring, they were free food for anyone willing to bend over and pick them. Mothers blanched them in boiling salted water, then tossed them in a hot pan with a spoonful of bacon fat and a crack of black pepper. They tasted of spring, of green water, and of something wild that no garden ever produced. They cost nothing but the walk to the river. In Lean Springs, they were the first fresh vegetable in months. Number 16. Head cheese. When a pig was butchered in November, the head went into the biggest pot in the house. It simmered for half a day with vinegar, bay leaves, peppercorns, and onion until the meat fell from the bone and the liquid turned thick with natural gelatin. The meat was picked free, seasoned hard, packed into a bowl, and waited until it set cold and firm. Sliced thin and served on rye bread with mustard, head cheese appeared on Manitoba and Quebec tables throughout the winter. It cost nothing because every ingredient was already there. For families who raised their own pigs, throwing away the head was unthinkable. You used what you had. Number 15. Cretins. In Quebec, cretins appeared on the breakfast table every morning, spread thick on toast, as natural and unremarkable as the sunrise. Ground pork and fat simmered low and slow with milk, onion, cloves, cinnamon, and savory, until the mixture thickened to a pale, grainy paste. It was poured into crocks and set in the cold to firm and kept for weeks. It was spread on bread at every meal of the day. The flavor was rich, sweet with spice, deeply porky. A batch cost about 40 cents and lasted a family 2 weeks. Every grandmother in Quebec had her version, and every version was claimed to be the definitive one. The arguments about whose cretins were best lasted longer than any winter. Number 14. Cabbage rolls. From the Ukrainian communities of the prairies came a dish that stretched a small amount of ground pork or beef into a meal that could feed 10 people without strain. Rice and meat mixed with onion and seasoning were rolled tight into blanched cabbage leaves. They were layered in a deep roaster and baked under a poured sauce of stewed tomatoes. The cabbage softened and melded into the filling. The rice swelled and absorbed everything around it. $1's worth of ingredients produced a pan that a family ate from for 2 days. In harvest season, Ukrainian and Polish mothers made these by the dozens. The threshers ate them cold from paper and thought themselves well fed. They were. Number 13, molasses bread. Every farmhouse kitchen in the Maritimes and Newfoundland ran on the same Saturday rhythm, baking day. The first bread out of the oven was always the dark, slightly sweet molasses bread that used blackstrap molasses as both sweetener and preservative. It was mixed with yeast, flour, lard, and warm water, left to rise by the stove, and baked until the crust turned deep brown and the kitchen smelled of sweetness and yeast. A slice, cut thick and still warm, was spread with butter, if there was any. A jug of blackstrap molasses cost 20 cents and made 8 loaves. Those loaves lasted the week. Number 12, potato soup. When the root cellar held potatoes but little else by February, potato soup appeared at midday and often at supper too, with no comment and no complaint. Diced potatoes with onion, a slice of salt pork, water, and salt. Simmered until they were falling apart. Some mothers mashed half against the side of the pot to thicken it. The best versions had dried herbs and a knob of butter stirred in at the end. A pot cost almost nothing, and it warmed the body against the cold that came through the walls of farmhouses built for something other than Saskatchewan winters. Number 11, salt code cakes. Along the Atlantic coast, salt cod was not a heritage ingredient. It was the basic protein fishing families depended on all year. It was soaked overnight to draw out the brine, boiled, flaked, mixed with mashed potato, onion, and egg, shaped into flat cakes, and fried in cast iron until golden on both sides. Served with baked beans and brown bread on Saturday morning, this was the standard maritime breakfast of the 1950s. A whole dried salt cod cost less than $1 and made enough cakes for a family of 5 to eat twice. The Maritimes built themselves on this fish. Number 10, raw puree pie. In the Acadian communities of Nova Scotia, raw puree pie was the dish that identified you as belonging to a place and a people. Raw potatoes were grated and pressed bone dry, then mixed back with hot broth from boiled chicken or pork. The starch rehydrated and formed a dense, slightly gelatinous dough, layered with meat and baked until the crust crisped. The texture was unlike anything else in Canadian cooking, heavy and satisfying in a way that often needed explanation to anyone not raised on it. In Clare County in the 1950s, this was not a special occasion dish. This was Sunday, every Sunday. Number 9, dried bean and barley soup, pattern break. This is the soup that fed Canada's poorest families and asked for nothing in return but time. Navy beans soaked overnight were added to a pot with pearl barley, a ham bone, onion, carrot, and water. It simmered for 3 hours until it thickened into something barely soup at all, and more accurately described as a meal in a bowl. A pound of dried beans cost 12 cents. A pound of barley cost 8 cents. The ham bone came from a joint already eaten. This fed a family of 6 for 2 meals and cost less than 30 cents total. Grandmothers knew its value without any research. They knew it because it kept everyone standing. Number 8, chicken fricot. In Acadian kitchens across New Brunswick, fricot was what you made when you needed to feed people now. Chicken pieces browned, then simmered with potatoes, onion, and summer savory until the broth turned golden and the meat fell from the bone. Dumplings dropped in for the final 20 minutes, and they swelled into soft clouds that soaked up the broth. The summer savory gave the dish a flavor that existed nowhere else in Canadian cooking, sharp and clean, and distinctly its own. A tough old hen cost about 60 cents. The potatoes came from the garden. The savory came from the herb bed by the back door. The meal cost under $1 and fed 8 people. Number 7, baked beans with salt pork. Every Saturday in Quebec and the Maritimes, the bean pot went into the oven the night before. White navy beans were layered with salt pork and a whole onion and covered with a sauce of molasses, dry mustard, salt, and water. The lid went on. The oven dropped to its lowest setting. The household went to sleep. By morning, the beans had turned mahogany brown, thick and sweet with a deep smoky undertone from the salt pork. Served for Saturday breakfast with brown bread, for Saturday lunch with leftover pork, and Sunday supper with whatever remained. A pound of navy beans cost 12 cents in 1954. A piece of salt pork was 15 cents. Baked beans with salt pork was not a recipe, it was a schedule. Number 6, mulligan stew, pattern break. The name came from the hobo camps of the Depression, and in the 1950s, it had not yet traveled far enough from that origin to lose the weight of it. Mulligan was the stew you made when you didn't know exactly what you had. Whatever root vegetables remained in the cellar, whatever bone was left from last week, dried peas or barley to stretch it, a tin of tomatoes from the shelf. You started the pot in the morning and added to it all day, and by supper time it had become something thicker and richer than the sum of its parts. Prairie families living with the memory of the dirty 30s barely 15 years behind them made mulligan with a practicality that had no patience for waste. It always worked. Number 5, corn chowder. In Ontario farm country and across the maritime provinces, corn chowder arrived in a pot so heavy 2 hands were required to carry it. Corn cut from the cob in August was cooked with diced potato, salt pork, and onion, with enough fresh milk to turn the whole thing ivory white. It was thickened with flour and enriched with butter at the end. It was served in wide bowls with crackers floated on top, sweet and salty, and thick enough to be a full meal. Some mothers put up dozens of jars of creamed corn in August so the chowder could continue through winter when nothing fresh remained. The smell of it on a cool September evening was the smell of harvest coming in and winter not yet here. Number 4, sugar pie. In Quebec, tarte au sucre required nothing from the outside world. Brown sugar or maple sugar, flour, cream, and butter were stirred together cold, then poured into a lard pastry shell and baked until the filling bubbled and set to a dense, sweet custard. Rich beyond reason. Sweet enough to make your teeth ache. Cut into thin wedges because a thin wedge was all you needed. A sugar pie cost about 20 cents to make. Every household in rural Quebec had a recipe. The differences between them were small. The love for the pie was not. Number 3, boiled dinner. From Nova Scotia to Newfoundland, the boiled dinner asked the least of the cook and gave back the most. Salt beef was put into a pot of cold water first thing in the morning. It was brought to a simmer and left to cook. By 3 in the afternoon, turnip, carrot, cabbage, and potatoes were added. By 5, everything was ready. The beef was placed in the center of a platter, and the vegetables were arranged around it. The broth was served separately in cups. Nothing was dressed up. A salt beef boiled dinner cost under $1 and fed 6. The leftover broth became soup the next day. The leftover beef became hash the day after. Nothing came back to the pot having been wasted. Number 2, pea meal, bacon, and eggs. Here's the meal that was Canadian before Canada knew what Canadian meant at the table. Pea meal bacon, the back bacon rolled in ground yellow peas that Ontario pork packers developed in the previous century, sliced thick and fried until the crust crisped gold and the interior stayed moist and sweet. 2 eggs fried in the same pan, soaking up the drippings, eaten with toast made from yesterday's bread. This was the breakfast before the long day began, the plate set down in silence that said, "Today there is enough." A pound of pea meal bacon cost about 60 cents in 1955. With eggs and a loaf, the whole breakfast fed 4 people for under $1. It was the taste of working Canada. Number 1, French-Canadian pea soup with tourtière. At the top of this list sits not one dish, but the meal that was, for hundreds of thousands of families, the week itself made edible. On Friday, pea soup. Thick, golden, smoky, poured into deep bowls with a heel of bread. Made from dried peas, a ham bone, and nothing else but ours. And beside it, tourtière, spiced with cloves and cinnamon and savory, baked into a golden crust that shattered at the touch of a fork. Together, these 2 dishes anchored the table in Quebec and Acadian households from Abitibi to Prince Edward Island. They cost almost nothing. They took all day to make. Grandmothers made them together. Mothers learned beside them. Children ate until they could not move Nigia. That table is mostly gone now. But for those who sat at it, it was the whole of Friday, the whole of winter, and the whole of what it meant to be fed. Across all 30 entries, from fried bologna at 30 cents to the pea soup and tourtière that built a culture, these forgotten Canadian meals tell the same story. Not just a story of poverty, though poverty was real. A story of competence. Of women who could turn a ham bone and a bag of dried peas into something that fed a family for 2 days. That knowledge is mostly gone, lost somewhere between the convenience aisle and the delivery app. If your grandmother made any of these, she knew something the grocery store never taught. The bowl she set down in front of you was the result of a calculation you never saw her make. And it was enough. It was always enough.